A struggling single dad, working endless hours in a tiny diner, can barely keep the lights on. His little boy, innocent and heartbroken, asks the one question no parent wants to hear. The whole diner falls silent. And that's when a billionaire, sitting just a few tables away, stands up. What happens next is beyond anyone's imagination. A simple act of kindness turns into a life-changing offer. But not everyone wants to see this single dad rise. In the shadows, someone powerful is ready to destroy everything he's built, spreading lies, tearing down his dignity, and threatening to take away the only thing that matters, his son's pride in him. One question changes everything. But when the rich and powerful clash with the humble and faithful, who will come out on top? And will this father's fight for dignity finally give his son the answer he's been waiting for, or shatter their world forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun peeked through the grimy windows of Cole's diner, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The familiar symphony of breakfast service filled the air, bacon sizzling on the griddle, coffee percolating in ancient machines, and the gentle clink of silverware against plates. Ethan Cole stood at his usual spot behind the grill, his movements precise despite the weariness in his shoulders. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, flipping pancakes while simultaneously monitoring the hash browns. The heat from the cooking surface had already made his forehead glisten with sweat, even though it was barely 7 in the morning. At the counter, Danny hunched over his math homework, his pencil tapping against the worn surface as he concentrated. His small frame was dwarfed by the red vinyl stool, legs swinging back and forth as he worked through another problem. "Hey, kiddo," Ethan called out between orders. "How's that multiplication coming along?" Danny's face scrunched up. "It's division, Dad, and it's harder than yesterday's homework." "You'll get it," Ethan encouraged, sliding a plate of eggs to Mary, their regular waitress. "Remember what we talked about? Take it step by step, just like following a recipe." The morning regulars filtered in. Mr. Peterson with his newspaper tucked under his arm, Mrs. Rodriguez ordering her usual black coffee and wheat toast, and the factory workers from the early shift grabbing quick breakfasts before heading home. Each customer got a warm greeting from Ethan, even though dark circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. "Order up," Ethan called, wiping his hands on his apron. He glanced at Danny, who was now erasing furiously. "Need some help there, bud?" "I got it," Danny insisted, though his frustrated expression said otherwise. "Just like you said, step by step." Ethan smiled, pride warming his chest despite his fatigue. He'd been pulling double shifts for weeks now, trying to keep up with the rising costs of everything. The diner's ancient equipment needed constant repairs, and the bills kept piling up. But watching Danny tackle his homework with such determination made it all worth it. The morning rush peaked, and Ethan's world narrowed to the rhythm of orders and cooking. Flip the burger, check the fries, plate the special, repeat. His movements were automatic, learned from years of experience rather than formal training. Between orders, he caught glimpses of Danny, finishing his homework, carefully putting his books away, and starting to help Mary clean tables. "Dad," Danny called out during a brief lull, "can I help with the dishes?" Ethan checked the clock. Still an hour before Danny's school bus would arrive. "Sure, buddy. Just be careful with the hot water, okay?" Danny beamed, proud to be trusted with such an important task. He pulled up the small step stool they kept in the corner and began carefully washing dishes in the deep sink. His small hands worked methodically, just like his father had taught him. The morning light grew stronger, filtering through the windows and highlighting the wear and tear of the diner, the cracked leather of the booths, the scratched surface of the counter, the slight unevenness of the floor tiles. But it also illuminated the warmth of the place, the fresh flowers Mary brought in every Monday, the children's drawings Danny had taped up near the register, the row of coffee mugs belonging to regular customers. "Hey, Mr. Cole," called Tommy, one of the factory workers. "These hash browns are perfect today, just like my mama used to make." Ethan nodded in appreciation, though his back was already screaming from standing so long. He'd been up since 4, prep cooking for the day ahead. The old recipe book his late wife had left him sat open on the shelf, its pages spotted with years of cooking stains. Sarah's recipes were still the heart of the diner's menu, keeping her memory alive in every dish he served. Danny finished the dishes and returned to his spot at the counter, watching his father work with admiring eyes. "Dad, Jenny in my class says her dad's a lawyer and works in a big building with windows all the way to the top." "Is that so?" Ethan responded, trying to keep his voice light while his heart squeezed painfully. "Yeah, but—" Danny paused, fiddling with a paper napkin. "I told her my dad makes the best pancakes in the whole world, and that's better than working in a tall building, right?" Ethan had to turn away for a moment, pretending to check something on the grill while he blinked back sudden tears. "That's right, buddy. That's absolutely right." The morning continued its steady pace. Ethan moved between the grill and the prep station, his movements growing slightly slower as fatigue settled deeper into his bones. Danny helped Mary refill salt shakers and straighten menus until it was time for school. "Bus is coming," Mary called out, spotting the yellow vehicle through the window. Danny quickly gathered his backpack, rushing to give his father a quick hug. "Bye, Dad. See you after school." "Have a good day, kiddo," Ethan called after him. "Learn something new for me." As Danny disappeared through the door, Ethan watched him go, his heart full of love and worry in equal measure. The morning sun now streamed fully through the windows. Another day properly begun at Cole's Diner. He turned back to the grill, where new orders waited, his tired muscles protesting but his spirit determined. There were still many hours ahead before he could rest, but the memory of Danny's proud words about his pancakes would keep him going. He could hear Mary chatting with customers, the clink of coffee cups, the scrape of forks against plates, the ordinary symphony of diner life. Through it all, Ethan kept cooking, his hands moving steadily, despite his exhaustion, serving up not just food, but little pieces of home to everyone who walked through his door. The afternoon sun blazed through the smudged windows of Cole's Diner, turning the cramped space into a warm haven from the midday heat. The lunch rush was in full swing, filling nearly every cracked vinyl booth and chrome-edged stool at the counter. Truck drivers hunched over steaming cups of coffee, their weather-worn faces reflecting miles of highway stories. Local factory workers grabbed quick bites during their precious lunch breaks, while elderly regulars nursed their endless refills and swapped town gossip. Behind the counter, Ethan Cole moved with practiced efficiency, his movements a well-rehearsed dance between the grill and the service window. His white apron, though scrubbed clean that morning, already bore the honest stains of a busy day's work. Dark circles underneath his eyes testified to another night of restless sleep, worried about bills and tomorrow's responsibilities. Danny sat at his usual spot at the counter, math homework spread before him. His pencil tapped against his notebook in a distracted rhythm as his eyes kept drifting to the other customers. The 10-year-old's worn t-shirt, a hand-me-down from the church donation box, hung slightly loose on his small frame. In the corner booth sat a man who stood out like a rose in a patch of dandelions. Lucas Grant's tailored charcoal suit and crisp white shirt marked him as someone distinctly different from the diner's usual clientele. He studied the menu with the same intensity he might give a business contract, occasionally glancing around the restaurant with careful observation. "Need more coffee, Mr. Thompson?" Ethan called out to one of the regulars, already reaching for the pot before the elderly man could nod his response. The routine was comfortable, predictable, until it wasn't. Danny's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a knife. "Dad?" he called out, louder than necessary. "Why do other kids have nice things and we don't?" The diner fell silent. Forks paused midway to mouths. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. The only sound was the persistent sizzle of hash browns on the griddle and the hollow whir of the ceiling fans. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he set down the coffee pot. His face flushed red, the color creeping up from his neck to his cheeks. The weight of every customer's stare pressed against his shoulders. In the corner booth, Lucas Grant lowered his menu, his steel-gray eyes focusing on the scene unfolding before him. His expression remained neutral, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, a lean forward, an increased attention. "Danny," Ethan managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Could you come help me in the kitchen for a minute?" Danny slid off his stool, his sneakers, held together with duct tape at the sole, scuffing against the floor. He followed his father through the swinging door into the kitchen's relative privacy. The kitchen's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Ethan knelt down to his son's eye level. The steam from the griddle made his forehead glisten, but the tremor in his hands had nothing to do with the heat. "Danny," he began softly, placing his calloused hands on his son's shoulders. "I know it's hard sometimes, seeing what other kids have. But we have something more important than new clothes or fancy toys. We have love, buddy. We have each other." Danny's lower lip quivered slightly. "I know, Dad. But Jimmy got new light-up sneakers yesterday, and Todd has a phone, and Sarah—" "Listen to me," Ethan interrupted gently, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mom used to say that true wealth isn't about what's in your pocket, it's about what's in your heart, and you, Danny Cole, have the biggest heart I know." Through the kitchen window, Lucas Grant sat perfectly still, his coffee untouched. His ear was tilted slightly toward the kitchen, catching fragments of the quiet conversation. A single eyebrow raised as he observed the father and son, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. His manicured fingers drummed once, twice on the tabletop, but he remained in his seat, watching and listening with growing interest. Ethan pulled Danny into a tight hug, feeling his son's small arms wrap around his neck. The embrace lasted longer than usual, both of them drawing strength from each other. When they finally separated, Ethan wiped quickly at his eyes before standing up straight. "Now," he said, attempting a smile, "how about you help me get these orders out? We're quite the team, remember?" Danny nodded, but his eyes still held a shadow of sadness that made Ethan's heart ache. They walked back into the dining area, where conversations had gradually resumed, though several customers still cast furtive glances their way. In the corner booth, Lucas Grant picked up his menu again, but his eyes no longer focused on the lunch specials. Instead, they followed the movements of the father and son as they returned to their positions, Ethan behind the counter, Danny back on his stool. The billionaire's expression remained unreadable, but his attention never wavered from the pair as they attempted to return to their normal routine. The afternoon sun continued its journey across the diner's worn floor, casting long shadows that stretched toward evening. The lunch rush would soon give way to the quiet lull before dinner. But for now, Ethan focused on his work, trying to ignore the lingering embarrassment that colored his cheeks and the weight of the well-dressed stranger's thoughtful gaze from the corner booth. The afternoon sun blazed through the smudged windows of Cole's diner, turning the cramped space into a warm haven from the midday heat. The lunch rush was in full swing, filling nearly every cracked vinyl booth and chrome-edged stool at the counter. Truck drivers hunched over steaming cups of coffee, their weather-worn faces reflecting miles of highway stories. In the corner booth, Lucas Grant sat alone, his tailored suit standing out against the worn surroundings. He dabbed his mouth with a paper napkin, his eyes never leaving Ethan and Danny. The boys' innocent questions still hung in the air, making the diner feel smaller than ever. Ethan's weathered hands trembled slightly as he wiped down the counter for the third time, trying to look busy. His cheeks still burned from Danny's question. The regular customers pretended not to notice, but their awkward silence spoke volumes. Danny slumped in his seat at the counter, his small shoulders drooping under the weight of his father's whispered words about love being more important than things. His fingers traced patterns in the condensation left by his water glass. The screech of chair legs against linoleum cut through the quiet. Lucas stood, straightening his jacket with practiced ease. His polished shoes clicked against the floor as he approached the counter where Danny sat. "Young man," Lucas's voice carried authority, but held an unexpected warmth. "I couldn't help but overhear your question earlier." Danny looked up, his eyes wide. Ethan stopped wiping the counter, his hand gripping the cloth tightly. "Sometimes the most important questions are the ones that make adults uncomfortable," Lucas continued, crouching slightly to meet Danny's eye level. "Your honesty is refreshing." The diner had gone completely silent. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed muted, as if the kitchen itself was holding its breath. Several customers turned in their seats to watch. Lucas's fingers moved to his wrist, unfastening the clasp of his watch. The timepiece caught the afternoon light, its face gleaming. "This watch was given to me when I was about your age. It reminded me that time is precious, and what we do with it matters more than what we own." Danny's mouth fell open as Lucas held out the watch. "Sir, I can't." "You can," Lucas smiled. "And you should. Your father is teaching you something valuable about love being more important than possessions. But sometimes, a gift isn't about the thing itself. It's about remembering that kindness can come from unexpected places." Ethan stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. "Mr. Grant, that's too generous. We couldn't possibly—" "Please," Lucas held up his hand. "Allow me this small gesture." He carefully fastened the watch around Danny's thin wrist, adjusting the band to fit. "There, perfect." A collective murmur of amazement rippled through the diner. Mrs. Henderson, a regular customer who always ordered the meatloaf special, wiped her eyes with her napkin. Even Big Joe, the gruffest truck driver on the route, nodded in approval. Danny stared at the watch in wonder, his finger gently touching the smooth face. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Thank you, sir." Lucas straightened up, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out several crisp bills, far more than his meal cost, and placed them on the counter. "The food was excellent, by the way. Best comfort cooking I've had in years." Ethan struggled to find words. "Thank you, Mr. Grant, but this is too much." "Not at all," Lucas smiled, gathering his briefcase. "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness ripple outward in ways we can't imagine." He nodded to them both and strode toward the door, the bell chiming as he left. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but something had changed. Customers smiled more warmly at Danny, and several patted Ethan on the shoulder as they paid their bills. As the sun began to set, Ethan untied his apron and hung it on its familiar hook. "Ready to head home, buddy?" Danny nodded, still admiring the watch that seemed to dwarf his small wrist. They stepped out into the cooling evening air, the streetlights just beginning to flicker on. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their shadows stretching long on the sidewalk. The watch caught the last rays of sunlight, sending little flashes of brightness against nearby buildings. "Dad?" Danny's voice was soft. "Why did that man give me his watch?" Ethan looked down at his son, his throat tight with emotion. He didn't have an answer that made complete sense. Here they were, walking home to their modest apartment above the hardware store, while somewhere Lucas Grant was probably returning to a mansion or penthouse. "Sometimes people surprise us, Danny," Ethan finally said, resting his hand on his son's shoulder. "And sometimes being honest, like you were today, touches people's hearts in ways we don't expect." Danny nodded thoughtfully, still staring at the watch. His face glowed with pride, but there was something else there too, a new understanding perhaps that kindness could come from anywhere, even from strangers in fancy suits. Ethan's cheek still burned slightly with embarrassment from the afternoon's events, but watching his son's joy helped ease the sting. Still, he couldn't help wondering what had made a billionaire like Lucas Grant take notice of them. What had he seen in their small-town diner that made him pause, listen, and respond with such unexpected generosity? As they walked beneath the deepening purple sky, the watch ticked steadily on Danny's wrist, marking each moment of this extraordinary day. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Ethan stood at the grill, expertly flipping pancakes while keeping an eye on the sizzling bacon. The familiar rhythm of the kitchen helped calm his nerves after yesterday's encounter with the mysterious billionaire. Danny sat at his usual spot at the counter, nose buried in a math textbook. Every few minutes he'd glance down at the gleaming watch on his wrist, still amazed by the generous gift. The bell above the door chimed. Ethan looked up to see Lucas Grant walking in, this time wearing a more casual but still clearly expensive dark blue blazer. The billionaire carried a leather briefcase and moved with purpose, settling into the same corner booth as yesterday. "Good morning," Lucas called out, his voice carrying across the nearly empty diner. "I hope I'm not too early for lunch." Ethan wiped his hands on his apron and grabbed a menu. "We serve all day, sir. What can I get you?" Lucas smiled, but didn't even glance at the menu. "Actually, I came to talk business. And please, call me Lucas." He gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Join me for a moment?" Ethan hesitated, looking back at the kitchen. "I'm the only cook on duty right now." "Dad," I can watch the grill, Danny piped up, jumping off his stool. Remember how you taught me to flip pancakes? Stay where you are, buddy, Ethan said firmly, though he couldn't help but smile at his son's enthusiasm. He turned to Lucas. Give me 5 minutes to finish these orders, and I'll join you. Lucas nodded, settling back in his seat. Take your time. Ethan worked quickly but carefully, plating the remaining orders and asking Sarah, his regular waitress, to keep an eye on things. When he finally slid into the booth across from Lucas, he felt distinctly out of place in his grease-stained apron. Yesterday's club sandwich was exceptional, Lucas began, opening his briefcase. The balance of flavors, the homemade mayo, it reminded me of meals my grandmother used to make. Ethan felt his face warm at the praise. Thank you. It's my late wife's recipe, actually. Most of our specials are. That's exactly what I wanted to discuss. Lucas pulled out a sleek folder. I'm hosting a charity gala next month for the Children's Education Foundation. 300 guests, very exclusive. He paused, studying Ethan's face. I want you to cater it. Ethan blinked, certain he'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? The gala. I want you to cater it. Lucas's expression remained serious. Full service. Appetizers through dessert. The budget is generous. Danny, who had abandoned any pretense of studying, appeared beside their booth. Really? Dad, that's amazing! Ethan's mind raced with all the reasons this was impossible. Mr. Grant, Lucas, I appreciate the offer, but I run a small diner. I've never catered anything close to that size. I don't have the staff, the equipment. All provided, Lucas interrupted smoothly. I'll handle the logistics. What I want is your food, these recipes that clearly come from the heart. He opened the folder, revealing detailed plans. The theme is heritage and hope. What better way to showcase that than with authentic family recipes passed down with love? Ethan's throat tightened at the mention of family recipes. He thought of his wife's handwritten cookbook, carefully preserved in their small apartment. The margins were filled with her notes, little drawings, memories of meals shared. Dad, Danny's voice was quiet but excited. You always say Mom would want us to share her recipes with the world, remember? Lucas watched their interaction with interest. Your son is wise beyond his years. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. The guests at this gala, they're used to fancy food, professional chefs. I'm just a diner cook. You're a talented chef who understands the power of food to connect people, Lucas corrected. These fancy people eat at expensive restaurants all the time. What they rarely get is food made with genuine heart and history. Danny tugged at his father's sleeve. Show him Mom's special meatballs, the ones with the secret ingredient. Despite his anxiety, Ethan couldn't help but smile. Those are reserved for very special occasions, buddy. Isn't this special? Danny's eyes were wide with excitement. Dad, this could be our big chance. Ethan looked at his son's hopeful face, then at Lucas's patient expression, and finally down at the detailed proposal. The numbers made his head spin. It was more money than he'd make in 6 months at the diner. Money that could help with Danny's school supplies, maybe even start a college fund. But it wasn't just about the money. There was something in Lucas's eyes, a genuine belief in Ethan's abilities that he hadn't encountered in years. And Danny's enthusiasm. When was the last time he'd seen his boy this excited about anything? Ethan took a deep breath. You really think I can do this? I know you can, Lucas said firmly. The question is, will you? Danny bounced on his toes. Please, Dad. Mom would say yes. You know she would. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, picturing his wife's smile, remembering how she always pushed him to dream bigger. When he opened them, he found himself nodding slowly. Okay, he said quietly, then with more conviction. Okay, yes, I'll do it. Danny let out a whoop of joy, drawing amused glances from the few other customers. Lucas smiled broadly and pulled out a pen. You won't regret this, Lucas said, sliding the contract across the table. Sometimes, the biggest opportunities come disguised as impossible challenges. As Ethan picked up the pen, his hand trembling slightly, he felt a small spark of hope ignite in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance they'd been waiting for. Dad, this could be our big chance, Danny whispered excitedly, and this time, Ethan allowed himself to believe it might be true. The small apartment above Miller's hardware store wasn't much, but it was home. Ethan fumbled with his keys, balancing a paper bag of groceries, while Danny bounced excitedly beside him. The lock finally clicked, and they stepped into their modest kitchen, where the yellow walls desperately needed a fresh coat of paint. "Can we start planning now, Dad?" Danny asked, sliding his backpack off his shoulders. His eyes sparkled with anticipation, the expensive watch still gleaming on his wrist. Ethan set the grocery bag on their small kitchen table. "Let me put these away first, buddy." He began unpacking ingredients: flour, sugar, fresh vegetables, and herbs. His mind was already racing through possible menu ideas. "Where are Mom's recipes?" Danny asked, opening cabinets at random. Ethan paused, his hand resting on a can of tomatoes. "In the box, on top of the fridge." He pulled over a kitchen chair and reached up, carefully bringing down a weathered cardboard box. Dust had settled on its lid, and the corners were soft with age. Danny watched intently as his father placed the box on the table. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. The familiar scent of old paper and his wife's perfume wafted up, making his heart catch. Inside, dozens of recipe cards were neatly organized, each one covered in Sarah's flowing handwriting. "I remember these," Danny said softly, picking up a card. "Mom's famous pot roast." He traced the letters with his finger. Ethan smiled, though his eyes felt damp. "She wrote down everything she cooked, said she wanted to make sure we'd always have her recipes." He began sorting through the cards, creating neat piles on the table. "These could work for the gala." Danny pulled up a chair, sitting close to his father. "Tell me about when Mom used to cook these." Ethan picked up a card for herb-crusted salmon. This one was her specialty. She'd make it every anniversary. He chuckled softly. "The first time she tried it, she nearly set off the smoke alarm. But she kept practicing until it was perfect." They worked through the evening, Ethan sharing stories as they sorted recipes. Danny grabbed a notebook from his backpack and started making lists, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration as he wrote. "What about her chocolate soufflé?" Danny suggested, holding up the card. "Everyone always said it was amazing." Ethan studied the recipe, nodding slowly. "That could work for dessert, but we'd need to figure out how to make it for 100 people." He ran a hand through his hair, the magnitude of the task settling in. The kitchen grew darker as the sun set, but neither noticed. They were lost in the world of Sarah's recipes, surrounded by cards spread across the table like a patchwork quilt of memories. Ethan jotted down ingredients and quantities, making calculations in the margins. "I wish Mom could see us now," Danny said quietly, organizing the chosen recipes into a neat stack. Ethan looked up from his notes, seeing the same gentle expression Sarah used to have reflected in his son's face. "She'd be proud of you, helping me like this." They ordered pizza when their stomachs started growling, eating while continuing to plan. Danny insisted on trying to multiply fractions to help scale up the recipes, though his math homework lay forgotten in his backpack. As the evening wore on, Ethan noticed Danny's eyes growing heavy. The boy tried to stifle a yawn, determined to keep working. "Time for bed, champ," Ethan said, gathering the scattered recipe cards. "Just a little longer?" Danny pleaded, but another yawn betrayed him. Ethan shook his head, smiling. "We've got a good start. The rest can wait until tomorrow." He helped Danny up from the chair, his son's feet dragging slightly as they walked to his small bedroom. The walls were decorated with drawings and a few carefully preserved photos of Sarah. Danny climbed into bed, still wearing the watch. "Dad?" he asked as Ethan pulled up the worn blanket. "Do you think we can really do this? The fancy gala thing?" Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, looking at their evening's work spread across the kitchen table through the open door. Sarah's recipes were stacked neatly beside his notes, and somehow her presence felt stronger than it had in years. "You know what?" he said softly, tucking the blanket around Danny's shoulders. "Maybe things really could change for us." The boy's eyes fluttered closed, a small smile on his face as sleep overtook him. Ethan stayed for a moment, watching his son's peaceful expression, before returning to the kitchen. He gathered the final menu draft, running his fingers over Sarah's handwriting one last time before setting it aside for the night. The gleaming glass and steel building towered over Ethan as he stood on the sidewalk, adjusting his only tie. Danny bounced excitedly beside him, still wearing Lucas's watch. The charity headquarters stretched so high into the sky that Ethan had to tilt his head back to see the top. "Wow, Dad. It's like 20 of our apartment buildings stacked on top of each other." Danny's eyes were wide with wonder. Ethan smoothed his slightly wrinkled blazer, the same one he'd worn to his wife's funeral 3 years ago. "Remember what we talked about, buddy? Best behavior, okay?" "I know, Dad. I'll be super quiet and polite." Danny mimicked, zipping his lips. They pushed through the revolving door into a lobby that sparkled with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. A security guard eyed them suspiciously until Ethan mentioned Lucas Grant's name. They were directed to the elevators, where Ethan's reflection in the polished brass doors showed every scuff on his worn dress shoes. The elevator whispered up to the 20th floor. When the doors opened, they stepped into a world of expensive art and plush carpets. A receptionist guided them to a large conference room where Lucas stood talking to a group of well-dressed people. "Ah, Ethan, Danny." Lucas's warm greeting drew everyone's attention. Come in. I want you to meet some key members of our charity board." As Lucas made introductions, Ethan noticed a tall woman in an impeccable navy suit watching him like a hawk studying its prey. Her silver hair was swept into a perfect chignon, and her pearl necklace probably cost more than his yearly rent. "And this," Lucas said, reaching the woman, "is Victoria Hale, our board's vice president." Victoria's perfectly manicured hand barely touched Ethan's as she shook it. Her smile never reached her eyes. "So, you're the diner cook Mr. Grant has been talking about?" The way she said diner cook made it sound like street sweeper. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied, standing straighter. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Victoria's gaze swept over his clothes, lingering on his scuffed shoes. "And this must be your son?" She glanced at Danny's second-hand clothes. "Yes, this is Danny," Ethan said, placing a protective hand on Danny's shoulder. "Charming." Victoria's tone suggested it was anything but. "Mr. Cole, you do understand this isn't some small-town potluck? We'll be hosting governors, CEOs, even a few celebrities." "I understand, ma'am. I've been working on a special menu. Have you ever even attended a black tie event?" Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with doubt. The room had gone quiet. Other board members watched the exchange with barely concealed interest. "No, ma'am," Ethan admitted. "But I know good food. I've been cooking since you were a child." "Yes, how quaint." Victoria turned to Lucas. "Lucas, darling, while I admire your charitable instincts, this is the biggest fundraiser of the year. We can't risk our reputation on someone who's never even been to a proper restaurant, let alone catered for one." Heat crept up Ethan's neck. Danny pressed closer to his side. Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but Victoria continued, addressing the room. "What will our donors think? They expect excellence, refinement, not diner food served by someone who clearly shops at." She paused, eyeing Ethan's blazer again. "Discount stores." "Mrs. Hale," Ethan said quietly but firmly, "I may not have fancy clothes or fine dining experience, but I know how to cook with heart. Every recipe I'm planning has been perfected over years." "Oh, please," Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Heart doesn't impress people who regularly dine at five-star restaurants. This isn't some small-town charity bake sale." "That's enough, Victoria." Lucas's voice cut through the tension. "I've tasted Ethan's cooking. It's exactly what we need, authentic, delicious food that reminds people why we're really here, to help our community." Victoria's smile turned razor-sharp. "Of course, Lucas. It's your reputation on the line, after all." She turned to the other board members. "Shall we continue our meeting? I'm sure Mr. Cole needs to get back to his establishment." As they filed out, Victoria paused beside Ethan. "Word of advice?" she whispered. "Know your place. People like you don't belong in our world." After they left, Lucas approached Ethan. "I apologize for Victoria. She's traditional in her views. Maybe she's right, Ethan said softly. I don't belong here. Dad makes the best food ever, Danny burst out, unable to stay quiet any longer. You'll see, Mrs. Hale, everyone will love it. Lucas smiled at Danny's outburst. Your son's right, Ethan. Don't let Victoria shake you. I believe in you. But Victoria's words echoed in Ethan's head all the way to the elevator, through the lobby, and into their old car, parked between shiny, luxury vehicles. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Dad? Danny's voice was small. Are you okay? Ethan tried to smile. I'm fine, buddy. She was mean, Danny said simply. But you always make the best food. They'll see. Ethan looked at his son's earnest face, remembering all the times Danny had bragged about his cooking to his friends at school. He squeezed Danny's hand, wishing he could feel as confident as his son sounded. The massive double doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel swung open silently as Ethan and Danny stepped inside. Their footsteps echoed across the polished marble floor of the lobby, making Ethan feel even smaller than he already did. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceiling medallions, casting rainbow reflections that danced across the walls. Danny's eyes were wide with wonder. Dad, look at all the sparkly lights! His voice carried through the empty space, making Ethan wince slightly. Inside voice, buddy, Ethan reminded him gently, tugging at his worn blazer. He'd ironed it twice this morning, but it still looked shabby compared to the hotel's grandeur. Lucas Grant emerged from a side door, his confident stride and tailored suit fitting perfectly with the luxurious surroundings. Ethan! Danny! Right on time. He crossed the lobby with a warm smile that seemed to melt some of the room's intimidating formality. Mr. Grant, thank you for meeting us, Ethan said, extending his hand. His palm felt sweaty against Lucas's firm grip. Please, it's Lucas. He knelt down to Danny's level. And how's that watch treating you, young man? Danny proudly held up his wrist, the expensive timepiece gleaming. I keep it super clean, sir. Dad taught me how to polish it properly. Lucas chuckled, straightening up. That doesn't surprise me at all. Your father seems like someone who takes pride in doing things right. He gestured toward a grand staircase. Shall we see the ballroom? As they climbed the stairs, Ethan's mind raced with calculations. The venue was far more upscale than anything he'd ever worked in. His simple diner dishes seemed laughably out of place here. The ballroom doors opened to reveal a space that took Ethan's breath away. Soaring ceilings stretched overhead, more crystal chandeliers casting warm light across tables dressed in crisp white linens. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city skyline. This is where 300 of the city's most influential people will gather next week, Lucas explained, his voice echoing slightly. And they'll all be experiencing your food, Ethan. Ethan's stomach tightened. Mr. Grant, Lucas, I have to be honest. I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. My cooking is simple. These people are used to fancy restaurants and professional caterers. Danny tugged at his father's sleeve. But Dad, your food makes people happy. Remember when Mrs. Peterson cried because your chicken soup reminded her of her mom's? Lucas raised an eyebrow, interested. Is that so? Ethan felt his cheeks warm. She was just being kind. No, Lucas said firmly. That's exactly why I chose you. Your food has heart, Ethan. These people eat at 5-star restaurants every week. What they're missing is authenticity. Real food, made with genuine care. They walked through the kitchen next, all gleaming stainless steel and professional equipment that made Ethan's diner setup look like a child's play kitchen. Lucas introduced him to the hotel's head chef, who would provide support staff for the event. As they discussed logistics, Danny wandered the kitchen in awe, careful not to touch anything. Ethan noticed how the boy stood straighter here, as if trying to prove he belonged in this grand place. Now, Lucas said, pulling out some papers, let's talk about your menu proposals. Ethan reached into his worn leather messenger bag, removing the carefully typed menu he'd spent hours preparing. He'd used his late wife's recipes as inspiration, adapting them for a larger scale while keeping their home-style essence. Lucas read through the offerings, nodding thoughtfully. Rosemary, crusted pot roast with root vegetables, Southern-style corn pudding, apple bread pudding with vanilla bean sauce. He looked up, smiling. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Elevated comfort food that reminds people of home. It's not very fancy, Ethan admitted. A man of integrity doesn't need fancy, Lucas replied. He needs honesty, skill, and heart. You have all three in abundance. Danny beamed at his father. See, Dad? I told you. As they continued their tour, Ethan felt something shift inside him. The grandeur still intimidated him, but Lucas's words had steadied him somehow. His food might be simple, but it was genuine. Maybe that could be enough. The sun was setting by the time they left the hotel, casting long shadows across the marble lobby. Lucas walked them to the door, shaking Ethan's hand again. Trust yourself, Lucas said quietly. You have something special to offer. Don't let anyone tell you different. The drive home was quiet, both father and son lost in their thoughts. Their small apartment felt especially modest after the hotel's luxury. But somehow, its familiar comfort was welcome. Ethan made them simple turkey sandwiches for dinner, adding extra pickles the way Danny liked. They sat at their small kitchen table, the sound of passing cars drifting through the window. Dad? Danny said between bites. I'm really proud of you. Ethan looked at his son, this remarkable boy who somehow always knew exactly what to say. Despite the mountain of work ahead, despite Victoria's sneers and his own doubts, a warm feeling of possibility settled in his chest. Thanks, buddy, he said softly, reaching across to ruffle Danny's hair. I'm proud of us too. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the diner's kitchen as Ethan stood at the prep station, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision over the cutting board. The clock on the wall read 11:30 p.m., but time seemed to have lost its meaning. Stainless steel bowls, filled with chopped vegetables and partially prepared sauces, surrounded him like loyal soldiers awaiting orders. Dad, can I help with the carrots? Danny asked, perched on a tall stool nearby. His homework lay forgotten on the counter, replaced by an eager determination to be part of this important night. Ethan glanced up, wiping his brow with his sleeve. You should be in bed, buddy. Please? Danny's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. I promise I'll be careful with the knife. Ethan's tired face softened. All right, but just for a little while. He pulled out a smaller cutting board and demonstrated the proper technique. Remember what I taught you. Fingers tucked in, nice and slow. Danny nodded seriously, mimicking his father's movements. The rhythmic sound of their knives working in tandem filled the quiet kitchen. Ethan watched his son from the corner of his eye, pride mixing with a familiar ache in his chest. Even at this late hour, Danny's presence made the empty diner feel warmer, more alive. Mom would love these recipes, Danny said softly, carefully lining up his carrot pieces. Especially the honey-glazed ones. Ethan's knife paused mid-chop. Sarah's old recipe cards sat nearby, their edges worn soft from years of use. Her handwriting danced across the yellowed paper, full of little notes and adjustments she'd made over time. She would, he agreed, his voice thick. These were her favorite things to cook for special occasions. Moving to the stove, Ethan stirred a pot of sauce, closing his eyes briefly as he inhaled the familiar aroma. The recipe was Sarah's signature creation, a perfect blend of herbs and spices that had won her countless compliments over the years. His lips moved in silent prayer as he tasted it, asking for the strength to do justice to her memory. Is it right? Danny asked, abandoning his carrots to peer into the pot. Almost. Ethan added a pinch more time, stirring slowly. Your mom always said the secret was patience. Let the flavors dance together. Time crept forward as they worked. Danny moved on to washing dishes, insisting his dad focus on the complicated parts. The pile of prep containers grew, each one carefully labeled and stored in the industrial refrigerator. Ethan's movements remained steady, but his shoulders grew heavier with fatigue. You're going to do great tomorrow, Dad, Danny said, drying his hands on a towel. Mr. Grant picked you because you're the best cook ever. Ethan managed a tired smile. I don't know about that, but we'll give it our best shot. He surveyed the kitchen, mentally checking his lists again. I think we've done all we can for tonight. As they cleaned up, Ethan noticed Danny trying to hide a yawn. Come on, chef's assistant. Way past bedtime. They locked up the diner and walked home through the quiet streets. The spring night air was cool and clear, stars twinkling overhead like distant diamonds. Danny clutched his father's hand, swinging it slightly as they walked. "Dad?" he asked sleepily. "Do you think the fancy people at the gala will like our food?" Ethan squeezed his son's hand. "I hope so, buddy. But you know what matters more? That we did our absolute best, just like your mom taught us." Their small apartment welcomed them with familiar shadows. Danny stumbled through his bedtime routine, barely able to keep his eyes open. Ethan tucked him in, smoothing back his dark hair, so much like Sarah's had been. "Proud of you, Dad," Danny mumbled, already half asleep. "Proud of you too, kiddo." Ethan kissed his forehead and quietly left the room. In his own bedroom, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, too tired to change, but too wired to sleep. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting a gentle glow across the room. His eyes drifted to the framed photo on his nightstand. Sarah's smile frozen in time, radiant and full of life. He touched the frame gently, feeling the weight of tomorrow's challenge pressing down on his shoulders. "I hope I make you proud tomorrow," he whispered to her image, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. The moonlight seemed to soften, wrapping around him like a gentle embrace as exhaustion finally pulled him down onto his pillow. The grand ballroom of the Mason Hotel sparkled like a sea of stars. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors, while elegant flower arrangements perfumed the air with roses and lilies. Well-dressed guests floated between tables, draped in crisp white linens, their jewelry catching the light with every gesture. Ethan Cole stood in the shadows near the kitchen entrance, his borrowed black suit feeling stiff and foreign. His hands, though scrubbed clean, still bore the small burns and calluses from years of cooking. He watched as servers in pressed white shirts carried his carefully prepared appetizers on silver trays. "Dad, you look like you're about to run away," Danny whispered beside him, looking sharp in his new dress shirt and tie, a gift from Lucas for the occasion. "Everything smells amazing." Ethan squeezed his son's shoulder, drawing strength from the boy's unwavering faith. "Just nervous, buddy. These people are used to fancy restaurants and professional chefs. But they've never had your cooking before," Danny said with complete conviction. From across the room, Lucas Grant caught Ethan's eye and gave an encouraging nod. The billionaire moved easily among his guests, directing their attention to the approaching servers with subtle gestures. Victoria Hale stood with a cluster of board members, her red evening gown matching the wine in her glass, her expression carefully neutral as she watched the servers circulate. The first round of appetizers went out. Delicate crab cakes with homemade remoulade sauce, based on Ethan's late wife's recipe. He'd spent hours getting the seasoning just right, remembering how she'd taught him the proper ratio of ingredients. His heart caught as he watched the first guests take tentative bites. A distinguished-looking woman in pearls paused mid-conversation, her eyes widening. "Oh my," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "this is extraordinary." Her companion, a food critic Ethan recognized from the local paper, took a bite and closed his eyes in appreciation. The balance of flavors. Perfect. Seasoning. "Who did you say was catering tonight?" The murmurs spread like ripples in a pond. Servers returned to the kitchen for the next course, butternut squash soup garnished with spiced pepitas, another family recipe that Ethan had carefully scaled up for the event. Each bowl went out steaming, the aroma drawing appreciative looks. Danny tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "See, they love it." A server hurried past with an empty tray. "They're asking for seconds on the crab cakes, Mr. Cole. I've never seen anything like it." Ethan felt his cheeks warm. In the kitchen, his small team worked with quiet efficiency, plating the main course. Herb-crusted chicken with wild mushroom sauce, roasted root vegetables, and fresh green beans almondine. Simple food, elevated by care and attention to detail. Food that told a story of home and heart. Lucas appeared at Ethan's side, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've got them eating out of your hand, my friend." Literally. His eyes twinkled. Even Victoria can't find anything to criticize. I saw her go back for a second crab cake when she thought no one was looking. The main courses went out, and the ballroom grew quieter as people sat to eat. Ethan held his breath, watching faces as they took their first bites. The food critic closed his notebook and simply enjoyed his meal. A good sign. Victoria's carefully maintained frown softened as she tasted the mushroom sauce. "Mr. Cole?" A gentle voice drew his attention. An elderly woman had approached without him noticing. "I wanted to tell you, this chicken reminds me of Sunday dinners at my grandmother's house. I haven't tasted anything like it in years." More guests began approaching, offering compliments. The food critic made his way over, notebook back in hand. "This is remarkable work, Mr. Cole. The technical execution is flawless, but more importantly, every dish has soul. That's rare in high-end catering." Ethan managed to thank them, his voice rough with emotion. Danny beamed beside him, standing straighter with each compliment his father received. As dessert was served, warm apple crisp with vanilla bean ice cream, the room filled with appreciative murmurs. Lucas took to the small stage at the front of the room, tapping his glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're enjoying this extraordinary meal. The man responsible is Ethan Cole, whose talent has been hiding in plain sight at a small diner in our city. Tonight, he's proved that true culinary artistry doesn't require fancy credentials, just passion, skill, and heart." Applause filled the room. Ethan felt his chest tighten with an unfamiliar feeling. Pride, pure and simple. For the first time in years he stood tall, accepting the recognition without shrinking away. Danny's hand found his, squeezing tight. The evening began to wind down, guests lingering over coffee and dessert. The food critic was typing rapidly on his phone, presumably working on his review. Victoria had disappeared somewhere, but Ethan barely noticed. He was too busy accepting business cards from guests asking about future catering opportunities. Lucas raised his glass in a subtle toast from across the room. Ethan nodded back, grateful beyond words. In the kitchen, his team was already starting cleanup, riding high on the evening's success. The borrowed suit didn't feel quite so foreign anymore. For this one shining moment, Ethan Cole felt like he truly belonged. Danny yawned beside him, though he tried to hide it. "I knew you could do it, Dad," he mumbled sleepily. Ethan pulled his son close, his heart full. The praise was wonderful, but nothing compared to the pride in his boy's eyes. Together, they watched the glittering crowd, no longer feeling like outsiders looking in, but like welcome guests at their own celebration of what was possible with faith, hard work, and a little help from an unexpected friend. The elegant ballroom hummed with satisfaction as guests finished their main courses. Plates that once held Ethan's signature braised short ribs and roasted vegetables were now nearly empty, bearing only artistic smears of sauce and appreciative crumbs. The warm glow of the chandeliers caught the contentment on faces around the room. Lucas Grant stood from his seat at the main table, gently tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The clear ring brought a hush over the crowd, and all eyes turned to the commanding figure in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. "Tonight, we've gathered to support our community's children's hospital." He paused, scanning the room with a gentle smile. "But something unexpected has happened here. We've been treated to more than just an excellent meal." Ethan shifted uncomfortably near the kitchen entrance, his borrowed suit suddenly feeling even tighter. Danny stood close beside him, unconsciously gripping the edge of his father's jacket. "You see," Lucas continued, "when I first walked into a small diner on Oak Street, I wasn't looking for anything special. I was just another hungry customer." He gestured toward where Ethan and Danny stood. "But what I found there was extraordinary." The crowd turned, and Ethan felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. Danny straightened up proudly next to him. "I found a man who works double shifts, sometimes triple, to provide for his son. A man who greets every customer with genuine warmth, no matter how tired he is. A man who took his late wife's recipes and turned them into something magical." Lucas's voice softened with genuine emotion. "I found a man who proves that true wealth is not measured in dollars and cents but in integrity." The ballroom remained silent, hanging on every word. Victoria Hale, seated at a corner table, pressed her lips into a thin line. "Ethan Cole, Lucas called out. "Would you join me up here?" Danny gave his father a gentle push. "Go on, Dad," he whispered excitedly. Ethan walked through the maze of tables, conscious of every step on the polished floor. The lights seemed brighter, the air thicker. When he reached Lucas's side, the billionaire placed a warm hand on his shoulder. "This man," Lucas addressed the crowd, "took a chance tonight. He stepped far outside his comfort zone, faced his doubts, and created something remarkable. Every dish that came out of that kitchen wasn't just food. It was a story of perseverance, of dignity, of love." Spontaneous applause broke out, starting slowly and building to a crescendo. Ethan saw Danny bouncing on his toes near the kitchen, his face split with the biggest grin. But more than that, Lucas raised his voice slightly over the applause. "Ethan Cole reminds us that greatness doesn't come from what we possess, but from who we are, from how we treat others, from the pride we take in our work, no matter what that work might be." The applause grew louder. Several guests stood, including some of the city's most prominent food critics who had been invited to the event. Ethan felt his chest tighten with emotion. "To Ethan Cole," Lucas raised his glass, "who proves that true wealth is in the heart." "To Ethan Cole?" the crowd echoed, glasses lifting throughout the room. Ethan caught Danny's eye across the room. His son was wiping tears from his cheeks, but still grinning. Even from a distance, Ethan could read his son's lips. "That's my dad." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and handshakes. Professional chefs came to ask about his techniques. Business owners requested his card. Society ladies who had never set foot in a small-town diner promised to visit. As the crowd began to thin and the evening wound down, Ethan finally had a moment to breathe. He loosened his tie slightly and found a quiet corner near one of the tall windows overlooking the city lights. Danny appeared at his side, still buzzing with excitement. "Dad!" he exclaimed, throwing his arms around Ethan's waist. "We did it, Dad!" Ethan hugged his son close, feeling the warmth of triumph, pride, and most importantly, his boy's unconditional love. All the late nights, the aching feet, the worried calculations of bills, in this moment, it all felt worth it. Not because of the acclaim or the opportunity, but because of the look in Danny's eyes. His son was proud of him, really, truly proud. In that embrace, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sensation that maybe, just maybe, he was enough. That all his efforts, his struggles, his determination to keep going when things seemed hopeless, it all meant something. Through Danny's eyes, he wasn't just a small-town cook struggling to get by. He was someone who could rise to any challenge, someone who could make magic happen in a kitchen, someone worthy of standing in this grand ballroom among the city's elite. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across Victoria Hale's face as she stood in a dim corner of the grand ballroom. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her champagne glass while she watched the crowd shower Ethan with praise. Her designer dress, worth more than Ethan's yearly salary, seemed to suffocate her as anger burned in her chest. Simply extraordinary. A food critic nearby gushed about Ethan's cooking. Such authentic, heartfelt flavors. Where has this chef been hiding? Victoria's lip curled in disgust. She caught sight of Danny hugging his father, their joy evident for all to see. It made her stomach turn. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. That diner cook wasn't meant to succeed. She spotted Jerome Waters, a notorious gossip columnist, sampling the last of his dessert. Perfect. Victoria glided across the marble floor, her movements calculated and smooth. "Jerome, darling," she cooed, touching his arm lightly. "Enjoying our little charity event?" The journalist's eyes lit up at her approach. Victoria was well known for providing him with juicy stories. "Mrs. Hale, always a pleasure. The food tonight is remarkable." Victoria hummed, leading him toward a quieter spot near a massive flower arrangement. "Interesting you should say that. Have you heard the whispers about our amateur chef?" Jerome leaned in closer, his reporter's instincts tingling. "Do tell." "Well," Victoria lowered her voice conspiratorially, "I hate to cast shadows on such a lovely evening, but there are certain concerns about the authenticity of his recipes." She paused for effect. Some say they're stolen from a prestigious cooking school where he once worked as a janitor. Jerome's eyebrows shot up. Really? That would be quite the scandal. Indeed, Victoria smiled coldly. And there are questions about his little diner's health code compliance too. Such a shame when someone tries to rise above their station without proper credentials. Across the room, Ethan remained blissfully unaware of the poison being spread. He was showing Danny how to properly plate a dessert, their heads bent together in concentration. The boy's eyes sparkled with wonder as his father created delicate chocolate decorations. The secret, Ethan explained softly, is to keep your hands steady and your heart light. He demonstrated the technique, drawing a perfect spiral with melted chocolate. Your mom taught me this. She always said presentation matters as much as taste. Danny tried to copy the motion, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. His attempt was wobbly but earnest. Did Mom make fancy food like this too? She could make anything beautiful, Ethan replied, his voice warm with memory. Just like you make everything brighter, buddy. Lucas approached their workstation, beaming with satisfaction. Ethan, you've exceeded every expectation. The guests can't stop raving about your food. Danny puffed up with pride. That's 'cause my dad's the best cook ever, Lucas chuckled, ruffling Danny's hair. Can't argue with that. How about we get you two home? It's been quite a night. Ethan glanced at his watch, surprised to see how late it had gotten. You're right. Danny has school tomorrow, and I need to open the diner early. Victoria watched from her corner as Lucas helped Ethan and Danny gather their belongings. Her fingers tightened around her empty glass. The truth has a way of coming out, she murmured to herself. Enjoy your moment while it lasts. The night air was cool and crisp as Ethan and Danny walked to their old car. Stars twinkled above, seeming to celebrate their success along with them. Danny yawned, the excitement of the evening finally catching up with him. You did great, Dad, he mumbled sleepily as they pulled out of the parking lot. Everyone loved your food. Thanks, buddy. Ethan's heart felt full to bursting. Having you there made it special. Danny smiled, his eyes growing heavy. He fiddled with the expensive watch on his wrist, Lucas's gift that had started this whole adventure. The steady tick-tick-tick matched his father's quiet humming as they drove through the peaceful streets. The streetlights cast intermittent glows across Danny's face as he drifted off, still holding on to the watch. His features relaxed in sleep, looking so much like his mother that it made Ethan's breath catch. Ethan drove carefully through the quiet town, his mind replaying the evening's triumphs. The praise, the smiles, the satisfaction of seeing people enjoy his food, it all felt like a dream. But the sound of his son's soft breathing beside him was wonderfully real. At each red light, Ethan couldn't help glancing at Danny's peaceful face. The boy had slumped against the window, the watch gleaming on his wrist in the darkness. His small hands curled protectively around it, as if holding on to the promise of better days ahead. The familiar streets led them home, past the darkened diner where tomorrow would bring another day of regular customers and simple meals. But tonight, just for tonight, Ethan let himself savor the taste of something grander. His son's pride, Lucas's support, and the validation of his cooking had given him a gift more precious than any watch, hope. The car rolled quietly through the night, carrying its precious cargo of father and son, while back at the gala, the seeds of trouble had already been planted in whispered conversations and calculated glances. But for now, in the peaceful bubble of their car, none of that existed. There was only the quiet hum of the engine, Danny's gentle breathing, and the steady tick of the watch that had changed their lives. The early morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Ethan pushed open the glass door, the familiar bell chiming above his head. His muscles still ached from yesterday's gala preparations, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. The triumph of last night's success lingered in his mind like a warm embrace. But something was off. The usual morning chatter died as he stepped inside. Regular customers who normally greeted him with friendly waves now avoided his gaze, hunching over their coffee cups. A newspaper rustled conspicuously in the corner booth. Martha, His longtime waitress stood frozen by the counter, her face pale. "Ethan," she whispered, clutching a copy of the local paper to her chest. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his stomach tightening. The silence in the diner felt heavy, suffocating. Martha's hands trembled as she handed him the newspaper. There, in bold black letters that seemed to shout from the page, was the headline, "Prestigious Gala Catered with Stolen Recipes. Health Department Investigates Local Diner for Multiple Violations." The words swam before Ethan's eyes. His legs went weak, and he gripped the counter for support. Below the headline was a photo of him from the gala, but the caption painted him as a fraud. Sources claim self-taught cook used deceased wife's stolen recipes while operating under questionable health standards. "It's not true," he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "Those were Sarah's recipes, my wife's recipes. His throat closed up. The article went on to quote anonymous sources, claiming he had stolen the recipes from a prestigious cooking school where his late wife had briefly worked as a cleaner. It detailed alleged health code violations, improper food storage, expired ingredients, unsafe cooking practices. Every word was a knife in his heart. The bell chimed again. Old Mr. Peterson, who'd eaten breakfast at the diner every day for 15 years, walked in, saw Ethan, and turned around without a word. The door closed with a final sounding click. "They're saying terrible things, Ethan," Martha said softly, tears in her eyes. "People have been calling all morning to cancel their regular orders. The Ladies' Bridge Club just called to move their weekly lunch meeting somewhere else." Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Danny. "Dad, kids at school are saying mean things. Can you come get me?" His hands shook as he tried to type a response. Before he could, the door chimed again. This time, a tall man in a crisp gray suit entered, carrying a leather briefcase. The health inspector's badge glinted on his lapel. "Mr. Cole?" The inspector's voice was formal, detached. "I'm here to conduct an immediate inspection following several serious complaints filed against your establishment." Ethan's world tilted sideways. Just yesterday, he'd been on top of the world, serving his food to the city's elite. Now, in the harsh morning light, that dream was crumbling around him. "Of course," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Whatever you need to see." For the next hour, the inspector meticulously went through every corner of the diner. He checked temperatures, examined storage areas, and made endless notes on his clipboard. Each scratch of his pen felt like another nail in Ethan's coffin. The regular breakfast crowd thinned out quickly, leaving empty booths and half-finished coffee cups. Martha tried to keep busy, wiping already clean tables, her eyes red-rimmed. Ethan watched as the inspector photographed a small crack in the wall tile he'd been meaning to fix, noted the date on every container in the walk-in cooler, and measured the temperature of the soup that had barely finished warming for the day. Finally, the inspector closed his notebook and faced Ethan. His expression was grave. "Mr. Cole, I'm afraid I have no choice but to issue a temporary closure order. We've found several violations that require immediate attention before you can resume operations." Ethan's legs gave out, and he sank into the nearest chair. The cheerful clinking of dishes from the kitchen, the hum of the coffee maker, the squeak of Martha's shoes on the floor. All the familiar sounds of his diner suddenly seemed very far away. "How long?" he managed to ask. "Until all violations are addressed, and you pass a follow-up inspection. Given the nature of the complaints and what I've observed today, I'd estimate at least 2 weeks, possibly longer." The inspector pulled out official-looking papers from his briefcase. "You'll need to post this notice immediately and cease all food service operations by noon today." Martha let out a small sob from behind the counter. Ethan stared at the bright red closed notice, the words blurring before his eyes. This diner wasn't just his business, it was his life, his son's future, his last connection to Sarah. And now, like everything else, it was slipping through his fingers. The inspector cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'll need you to sign here, acknowledging receipt of the closure notice." He held out a pen. Ethan's hand moved automatically, scrawling his signature on the dotted line. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, casting cheerful patterns on the floor that seemed to mock his despair. The same sunlight that had felt so promising just an hour ago now illuminated every imperfection, every crack, every reason his dreams might have been too big after all. The setting sun painted their small apartment building in shades of orange and purple. Ethan's ancient sedan wheezed into its usual spot, the engine ticking as it cooled. Danny hadn't said a word. During the drive home from the diner, his small shoulders hunched forward, the gifted watch from Lucas now hanging limply from his wrist. "How about some mac and cheese for dinner, buddy?" Ethan tried to sound cheerful as they climbed the creaky stairs to their second-floor apartment. The hallway lights flickered, casting uncertain shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Danny just shrugged, dragging his feet. Before Ethan could unlock their door, voices drifted up from the courtyard below. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Powell, their downstairs neighbors, were talking in that particular way people do when they think no one's listening. "Can you believe it?" Mrs. Henderson's voice carried clearly through the open window. "All those fancy recipes he claimed were his wife's? Stolen? Every last one?" Danny froze on the landing, his hand gripping the stair rail. "And did you hear about the health violations?" Mrs. Powell's reply was thick with judgment. "Makes you wonder what we've been eating all these years. A fraud, that's what he is." Ethan fumbled with the keys, trying to get Danny inside before he could hear more, but it was too late. His son's face crumpled like paper in rain. "Danny." Ethan reached for him, but Danny pushed past into their apartment, dropping his backpack with a thud that seemed to echo through their small home. The kitchen light buzzed to life, harsh fluorescent illuminating the stack of dishes from breakfast, the collection of recipe cards held together with a rubber band, the calendar marked with bill due dates. Everything that had felt cozy and sufficient yesterday now seemed shabby and inadequate. Danny stood in the middle of their living room, his shoulders shaking. When he turned to face his father, tears streamed down his cheeks. "Why can't we just be normal?" His voice cracked. "Other kids' dads have real jobs in offices. They don't get called frauds. They don't have their restaurants shut down." Each word hit Ethan like a physical blow. He moved toward his son, but Danny backed away. "Tommy's dad is a lawyer. Maria's mom is a doctor. And my dad." Danny's voice rose, thick with hurt and confusion. "My dad can't even keep a diner open. Now everyone's going to make fun of me even more." Ethan's throat tightened. "Danny, those things they're saying, they're not true. You know that, right?" "It doesn't matter," Danny shouted, his face red. "Nobody believes us anyway. I heard kids at school today. They said you probably poisoned people, they said." His voice hitched. "They said that's why Mom got sick too." The cruel absurdity of that accusation knocked the breath from Ethan's lungs. He sank onto their worn couch, legs suddenly unable to hold him up. Danny's anger crumbled into raw grief. "I just want to be normal," he whispered, tears falling faster now. "I want a house with a yard. I want Mom back. I want kids to stop whispering when I walk by." His small chest heaved with sobs. "I don't want to be different anymore." Ethan moved forward, and this time Danny didn't pull away. He gathered his son into his arms, feeling the tremors that ran through the small body. Danny buried his face in his father's shirt, his tears soaking through to Ethan's skin. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered into his son's hair. "I'm so sorry, Danny." His own tears fell silently, dropping onto Danny's head. All the pride from the gala, all the hope for a better future, it felt like ashes in his mouth now. They sat there as the room grew dark around them, holding on to each other while their world seemed to crumble. Ethan's tears fell harder as the full weight of his failure pressed down on him. He'd tried so hard to give Danny a good life, to make up for everything they'd lost. But in the end, he'd only brought more pain and shame to his son. The recipe cards on the kitchen counter, his late wife's precious legacy, seemed to mock him now. Even their small apartment, which he'd worked so hard to make feel like home, felt like evidence of his inadequacy. Every dream he'd dared to dream after the gala now felt like a cruel joke. Danny's sobs gradually quieted to hiccups, but Ethan continued to hold him close, as if he could somehow shield his son from the harsh realities of their life. The darkness deepened around them, but neither moved to turn on a light. In the shadows, Ethan's tears continued to fall silently, each one carrying the weight of his perceived failure as a father. The watch on Danny's wrist caught a glint of streetlight from outside, a reminder of the brief moment when everything had seemed possible. Now it felt like just another symbol of the world they could never truly be part of, the normal life they would never have. They sat together in the growing darkness, a father and son united in their pain, while outside their window, the neighborhood continued its evening routine, unaware of the hearts breaking in the small apartment above. The morning light struggled to penetrate the closed blinds of Pete's family diner, casting thin stripes across worn linoleum floors. Ethan sat alone at the counter, his coffee growing cold beside him. The health department's bright red notice glared from the front window, a stark reminder of his fall from grace. The silence felt wrong. Usually, the diner hummed with life, the sizzle of bacon, the clink of plates, the chatter of regulars who'd become like family. Now, only the occasional hum of passing cars outside broke the heavy quiet. Ethan's fingers traced the edge of the counter he'd wiped thousands of times before. The familiar scratch near the register where Mrs. Henderson always set her purse. The slight dip in the surface where Tom the trucker tapped his spoon against his coffee cup every morning. Each mark told a story, held a memory. He glanced at the kitchen, its stainless steel surfaces dulled without their usual gleam. Pots hung motionless on their hooks. The grill, his constant companion through countless meals, sat cold and dark. The health inspector's checklist lay crumpled in the trash, its damning marks feeling like personal accusations. "Maybe it's time," he muttered to the empty room. His voice sounded hollow, bouncing off vacant walls. "Maybe I was fooling myself all along." The classified section of yesterday's newspaper lay spread before him. Circled job listings for warehouse work and night security positions jumping out from the page. Safe jobs. Normal jobs. Jobs where he couldn't let anyone down. Standing with a heavy sigh, Ethan walked the length of the diner. His shoes squeaked against the floor. He'd always meant to fix that one loose tile by table 4. The booth where Lucas had sat that fateful day seemed to mock him now. He could still see Danny's face lighting up at the gift of the watch, still feel that surge of hope when Lucas had offered him the catering job. Some dream that turned out to be, he said to himself, running a hand along the back of a chair. The wall of photos near the register caught his eye. Snapshots of regular customers, of Danny's birthday celebrations, of staff Christmas parties. In the center, slightly faded but still clear, hung a picture of Sarah, his late wife, her smile radiant as she held up a plate of her famous apple pie. She'd always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. Moving behind the counter, Ethan began mindlessly straightening things that didn't need straightening. The salt and pepper shakers stood in their usual pairs, the napkin holders waited ready for customers who wouldn't come. He lifted a salt shaker to wipe underneath it, and something fluttered to the counter. A recipe card, yellowed with age, written in Sarah's neat handwriting. Her chicken pot pie recipe, the one she'd insisted would warm any heart on a cold day. Somehow it had slipped under the shaker, forgotten until now. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked up the card. Sarah's voice seemed to echo in his memory. "Food isn't just about filling bellies, honey. It's about filling hearts. Don't ever forget that." He traced her handwriting with his finger, remembering how she'd stay up late, testing recipes, how she'd never give up until they were perfect. The card's edges were worn from use, small spots of flour still visible in one corner. "What would you have me do?" he whispered, holding the recipe card close to his heart. The empty diner held no answers, but Sarah's presence felt stronger than ever in the quiet morning light. The recipe card carried more than just instructions for a perfect pot pie. It carried her spirit, her determination, her unwavering belief that food could bring people together, that it could make the world a little better, one meal at a time. Ethan stood there, surrounded by the echoes of happier days, clutching this unexpected message from the past. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds outside, sending stronger beams through the blinds, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. "What would you have me do?" he whispered again, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the empty diner. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the diner's dusty windows. Ethan sat slumped at his usual spot behind the counter, methodically sorting through old receipts he'd already checked 3 times. The empty chairs and tables seemed to mock him, a stark reminder of bustling days now gone. A gentle knock at the door made him look up. Through the glass he saw Lucas Grant's familiar silhouette. Ethan's first instinct was to pretend he hadn't heard, to avoid facing another person who'd surely lost faith in him. But something in Lucas's steady gaze made him rise and shuffle to the door. "We're closed," Ethan said automatically, his voice rough from disuse. "Health department orders." Lucas simply smiled. "I know. Let me in, Ethan." With a heavy sigh, Ethan unlocked the door. The little bell above it jangled cheerfully, the sound painfully out of place in the gloomy space. Lucas stepped inside, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the humble surroundings. But unlike before, when Ethan had felt intimidated by such finery, now he was too tired to care. "If you're here about the gala money, I'll pay it back," Ethan said, turning away. "Somehow." "I'm not here about money." Lucas's shoes clicked on the linoleum as he followed Ethan to the counter. "I'm here about you." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "There's nothing left to say about me. The papers said it all." "The papers," Lucas said, settling onto a stool. "Print what sells. Truth isn't always profitable." He paused, studying Ethan's face. "You haven't been sleeping." "Danny's having nightmares," Ethan admitted, absently wiping the already clean counter. "Kids at school, they're not kind. And I can't." His voice caught. "I can't fix it for him." Lucas nodded slowly. "You know, when I was 10, my father lost everything. Not because of scandal, just bad investments. But I remember how it felt, watching him give up." He leaned forward. "Don't do that to Danny." "I'm not giving up," Ethan protested weakly. "I'm being realistic. Nobody in town will eat food I make anymore. Victoria made sure of that. You don't need their approval." Lucas's voice carried a sudden intensity that made Ethan look up. "Host one dinner. Show them your heart." Ethan stared at him. "A dinner? Here? The health department will clear you by tomorrow. I had my lawyers look into Victoria's claims. They're falling apart faster than cheap pastry." Lucas smiled. "But that's not the point. The point is, you need to remember who you are." "And who's that?" Ethan asked quietly. "A man who cooks with love. A father who teaches his son dignity through actions, not words. The same man who made my tomato soup taste like childhood memories I thought I'd lost." Lucas stood up, straightening his jacket. "One dinner, Ethan. Not for the critics or the gossips. For the people who matter." The door jingled again, and Danny burst in, his backpack bouncing. He stopped short at the sight of Lucas, then broke into a tentative smile. "Mr. Grant, are you—" He looked hopefully at his father. "Are you helping Dad fix things?" Lucas crouched down to Danny's level. "Actually, your dad's going to fix things himself. He just needs to remember he can." Danny's face lit up. "Like a special dinner? Dad makes the best special dinners. Remember when Mrs. Peterson was sick, and you made that huge pot of chicken soup? The whole block came for some?" Ethan felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he'd almost forgotten. He looked at his son's shining eyes, then at Lucas's knowing smile. The diner suddenly didn't seem quite so empty. "One dinner?" he asked softly. Danny bounced on his toes. "Please, Dad? We could invite everyone. Even the mean people. Your food always makes people nicer." Lucas straightened up. "Well, what do you say, Chef Cole?" Ethan looked around his diner, not at the health notice or the empty seats, but at the walls that held years of memories. His wife's recipes, the marks on the doorframe showing Danny's growth, the countless meals that had brought comfort and joy to their little community. Danny slipped his hand into Ethan's, squeezing tight. "We can do it, Dad, together." Ethan squeezed back, feeling the first real smile in days tugging at his lips. "Okay," he said, meeting Lucas's gaze. "One dinner, one last time." The afternoon light seemed a little brighter now, painting golden squares on the floor. Outside, a few people walked past, glancing in curiously at the unlikely trio, the billionaire, the cook, and the hopeful little boy. Inside, something was changing. like the first warm breeze after a long winter. It wasn't much, just a small yes to a simple suggestion. But in that moment, it felt like enough. It felt like a beginning. The morning sun hadn't yet peeked over the horizon when Ethan unlocked the diner's front door. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed it open, the familiar bell chiming in the empty space. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the boards on the windows. The health department's notice still hung prominently on the door, a constant reminder of his fall from grace. Danny shuffled in behind him, carrying a stack of folding chairs that seemed too big for his small frame. "Can I start setting these up, Dad?" "Sure, buddy." Ethan's voice was soft, uncertain. He watched his son carefully arrange the chairs, determination evident in every movement. The sight made his chest tight with emotion. A truck engine rumbled outside, and Ethan's heart skipped. Through the gaps in the boards, he saw Mr. Den Johnson from the hardware store parking his pickup. The older man emerged with 2 bags of potatoes and 3 sacks of onions. "Thought you might need these," Mr. Johnson called out as he entered, setting the bags down with a thud. "My wife's sending over some more supplies later." Before Ethan could properly thank him, more vehicles pulled up. Mrs. Rodriguez from the apartment complex across the street arrived with her entire family, carrying containers of homemade salsa and fresh tortillas. Behind them came the Chen family from the local grocery, bringing boxes of fresh vegetables. "We want to help," Mrs. Rodriguez said simply, her warm smile erasing any need for further explanation. Danny bounced excitedly between the arriving neighbors. "Look, Dad, everyone's coming!" A group of veterans from the local VFW post showed up next, led by old Jim Baker, who'd been coming to the diner for morning coffee every day for the past decade. "We brought muscle and know-how," Jim announced, already rolling up his sleeves. "Point us where you need us, Ethan." The tight knot in Ethan's throat made it hard to speak. These were his regular customers, people he'd served countless times, now showing up to serve alongside him. The morning progressed in a blur of activity. The veterans helped remove the boards from the windows, letting sunshine stream in properly for the first time in days. Women from the church group arrived with tablecloths and flowers. Someone brought a portable radio that filled the air with gentle music. Danny worked tirelessly, directing people with the confidence of a seasoned maître d'. "The tables should go here," he'd say, or Mom always put the flowers in the middle. Each time he mentioned his mother, Ethan felt a bittersweet pang, knowing she would have loved seeing their community come together like this. By noon, the transformation was remarkable. The diner's worn linoleum floor had been scrubbed to a shine. Mismatched tables were arranged in neat rows, covered with clean cloths in cheerful colors. The kitchen hummed with activity as volunteers washed dishes and prepped ingredients. Sarah from the local bakery arrived with 3 huge trays of fresh rolls. "Don't you dare try to pay me, Ethan Cole," she warned when he reached for his wallet. "This is what neighbors do." A group of high school students showed up with handmade signs announcing the community dinner. They taped them to the newly cleaned windows, their young faces bright with purpose. Among them was Tommy, who used to tease Danny about his old clothes. Now he worked alongside Danny, helping to arrange chairs and asking earnestly about where things should go. In the kitchen, Ethan found himself surrounded by helping hands. Veterans who'd never cooked a day in their lives carefully followed his instructions for chopping vegetables. Mrs. Chen demonstrated her technique for quick pickling cucumbers. Mr. Rodriguez shared his secret for perfectly seasoned beans. "My wife's recipe cards," Ethan explained softly when someone asked about the worn papers he kept consulting. "She always said food brings people together." The kitchen grew quiet for a moment, everyone understanding the weight of those words. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as more people arrived, bringing dishes to share, casseroles, salads, desserts. The diner's small space somehow expanded to accommodate everyone's contributions and goodwill. Danny tugged at Ethan's sleeve during a quiet moment. "Dad, look." He pointed to the crowd of people working together, laughing, sharing stories. "It's like we have a really big family now." Ethan had to turn away to wipe his eyes. The sight of his community, people from all walks of life, some he knew well and others he'd only nodded to in passing, Coming together to help him and his son was overwhelming. As evening approached, the first families began arriving for dinner. The diner's old fluorescent lights were supplemented by strings of borrowed Christmas lights, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd. The aroma of home-cooked food filled the air. Ethan's signature meatloaf, Mrs. Rodriguez's enchiladas, Mr. Chen's stir-fried vegetables, and countless other dishes contributed by neighbors. People who had never sat together before found themselves sharing tables, passing plates, and trading stories. The mayor sat next to the street sweeper. The bank manager's kids played with the janitor's children. The boundaries that usually divided their small town seemed to dissolve in the warm atmosphere of shared food and fellowship. Through it all, Ethan moved from table to table, serving food, refilling drinks, and receiving countless pats on the back and words of encouragement. Each time someone praised his cooking or squeezed his shoulder in support, he felt a small piece of his broken confidence begin to heal. Danny flitted between tables like a happy butterfly, proudly telling anyone who would listen, "My dad made that," or, "Would you like more coffee?" His face glowed with joy, all traces of recent tears forgotten in the warmth of community support. As the evening deepened, the diner glowed like a beacon in the growing darkness. Through the windows, passers-by could see tables full of people sharing meals and laughter. The sound of conversation and clinking plates mixed with the occasional burst of genuine laughter, creating a symphony of community spirit. Ethan paused in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, taking in the scene. The diner that had felt so empty and cold just that morning now pulsed with life and warmth. He watched as a young mother cut up food for her toddler while an elderly veteran told stories to a group of enchanted children. In every corner, people who might never have spoken to each other were sharing food and conversation as if they'd been friends for years. The simple act of breaking bread together had transformed his humble diner into something magical, a place where differences didn't matter and community meant more than status or wealth. The morning light streamed through the kitchen window of Ethan and Danny's small apartment. Ethan sat at their worn kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, something that had never happened before. Danny bounced into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, his hair tousled from sleep. "Dad, look at this!" He thrust his tablet in front of Ethan's face, nearly knocking over the coffee cup. The screen showed dozens of photos from last night's community dinner, each one filled with smiling faces and plates heaped with Ethan's cooking. "The pictures are everywhere," Danny explained, scrolling through post after post. "Mrs. Johnson from next door shared it, and then her daughter shared it, and now everyone's sharing it." Ethan leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses. The local news website's headline jumped out at him, "Local cook feeds hundreds despite scandal. Community rallies behind beloved diner owner." Below it was a photo of him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, teaching a group of veterans how to make his signature meatloaf. "Look at the comments, Dad," Danny pointed excitedly. "Everyone's saying such nice things." Ethan scrolled through the comments, his vision blurring slightly. "Ethan Cole's food brought our whole neighborhood together last night. That's real wealth right there. My grandmother used to say you can taste love in good cooking. Mr. Cole's food is full of it. Been eating at Cole's Diner for 15 years. Never met a more honest man or a better cook." His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Lucas with a link to another article. The headline read, "Small Town Cook Shows Big Heart. How One Man's Community Feast Exposed the Truth Behind Recent Scandal." Danny climbed onto the chair next to his father, pressing close to read along. The article detailed how Victoria Hale's accusations were falling apart under scrutiny. Several renowned chefs had come forward, stating that the recipes she claimed were stolen were actually common family-style dishes, each cook adding their own special touch. "Dad, look." Danny pointed to a photo halfway through the article. It showed both of them in the diner's kitchen, Ethan teaching Danny how to knead dough. The caption read, "Father and son keeping family traditions alive at Cole's Diner." Ethan's eyes welled up as he read a quote from one of the veterans who had helped serve. "Mr. Cole didn't just feed us last night, he showed us what community means. When someone's down, you don't kick them, you help them up. That's what he did for me when I came back from overseas," giving me my first job. Now it's our turn to stand by him." Another notification popped up. A local food blog had shared pictures of the feast. The comments section overflowed with stories from people who had been there. "My kids are picky eaters, but they cleaned their plates last night. Mr. Cole even showed them how he makes his special mac and cheese. The way he worked with those veterans in the kitchen, teaching them cooking basics while preparing a feast for hundreds. That's not something a dishonest man does. I was there when he started his diner years ago. His wife's recipes have always been his pride and joy. Anyone claiming he stole them doesn't know Ethan Cole." Danny watched as his father wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Dad?" he asked softly. "Are you okay?" Ethan nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The simple support of his neighbors, the way they had rallied around them in their darkest moment, it overwhelmed him. He thought of his late wife, how proud she would be to see their community coming together like this. Another article appeared. "Social Media Champions Small Town Cook: How a Community Feast Changed the Narrative." The piece included interviews with several guests from the charity gala, all praising Ethan's cooking and his character. Danny leaned against his father's shoulder, reading the outpouring of support. His face beamed with pride as he scrolled through more comments. "Mr. Cole could have given up after what happened, but instead, he showed us all what real class looks like. That dinner wasn't just about food. It was about dignity, community, and standing up for what's right. The way he included everyone, rich, poor, young, old, that's what makes him special. No wonder his food tastes like home." Ethan's phone kept buzzing with messages from people he hadn't heard from in years, all expressing their support. Former customers, old friends, even his high school teachers. Everyone seemed to want to share a kind word or a memory of the diner. Danny wrapped his arms around his father's neck, hugging him tight. "See? They know the truth," he said softly. The words hit Ethan hard, and he pulled his son close, tears flowing freely now. All the doubt, all the shame of the past few days melted away in the face of such overwhelming support. In that moment, holding his son and reading the heartfelt messages from his community, Ethan realized that sometimes the darkest moments could lead to the brightest revelations. The scandal that was meant to destroy him had instead revealed just how many lives he had touched with his simple diner and honest cooking. The mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Charity Foundation felt tense and airless as board members filed in for the emergency meeting. Victoria Hale sat at her usual spot near the head of the table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on the polished wood. Her designer suit and expertly styled hair projected her usual air of authority, but there was an undercurrent of nervous energy in her movements. Other board members whispered among themselves, stealing glances at both Victoria and Lucas Grant, who stood calmly at the front of the room. Unlike Victoria's obvious agitation, Lucas radiated quiet confidence. He arranged several folders on the podium with deliberate care, waiting for everyone to settle. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Lucas began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "I've called this meeting to address some serious allegations that have recently come to light." Victoria's lips thinned into a tight line. "Lucas, really, I don't see why we need to waste everyone's time with—" "Please, Victoria," Lucas cut in smoothly. "You'll have your chance to speak." He opened the first folder and began distributing copies of documents to each board member. "What you're receiving now is evidence of a coordinated effort to sabotage Ethan Cole, the caterer from our recent charity gala." The room filled with the sound of rustling papers as board members began examining the documents. Several gasped as they read through the contents. "As you can see," Lucas continued, "these are copies of emails between Ms. Hale and several individuals, including a local health inspector and a journalist from the Daily Herald." He paused, letting the implications sink in. The timestamps clearly show these communications began before the gala, not after, as Ms. Hale previously claimed. Victoria's face had gone pale, but she quickly recovered. "This is ridiculous. Those could easily be fabricated. The emails have been authenticated by our IT department," Lucas replied calmly. He moved to the next set of documents. We also have sworn statements from both the health inspector and the journalist, confirming they were approached by Ms. Hale with false information about Mr. Cole. One of the older board members, Dr. Harrison, adjusted his glasses as he studied the papers. These allegations about stolen recipes, they were completely fabricated? Entirely, Lucas confirmed. Mr. Cole's recipes were his late wife's family traditions, passed down through generations. We have documentation proving their authenticity. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is a witch hunt. Lucas has always had it out for me, and now he's trying to destroy my reputation with these baseless accusations. Baseless? Lucas raised an eyebrow and produced another folder. Perhaps you'd like to explain these bank transfers from your personal account to the health inspector's offshore account? A collective murmur of shock rippled through the room. Several board members shook their heads in disapproval. Mrs. Chen, a usually quiet member, spoke up. This is deeply disturbing. We're supposed to be helping people, not destroying lives for personal vendettas. Exactly, Lucas agreed. Mr. Cole is a hard-working single father who was trying to build a better life for his son. Instead of supporting him, one of our own board members actively worked to destroy him. Victoria's composure finally cracked. He doesn't belong in our circle. He's just a cook from some run-down diner. What does he know about our world? And that's precisely the problem, isn't it? Lucas's voice carried a sharp edge now. You believe wealth determines worth. But Mr. Cole has shown more integrity and grace under pressure than you've displayed in all your years on this board. The room fell silent as Lucas laid out his final piece of evidence. A video recording of Victoria bragging to another board member about how she'd orchestrated the whole scandal. I move for an immediate vote on Miss Hale's removal from the board, Dr. Harrison announced, his voice heavy with disappointment. Seconded, Mrs. Chen added quickly. Victoria looked around the room desperately, searching for allies, but found none. One by one, hands raised in favor of her removal. The vote is unanimous, Lucas announced. Victoria, you are hereby removed from the board, effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear out your office. Victoria snatched her designer handbag from the table, her hands shaking with rage. You'll regret this, Lucas. All of you will. She stormed toward the door, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. As she reached for the handle, she turned back for one final glare at the room. But the other board members had already turned away, discussing the need to issue a public apology to Ethan Cole. Lucas watched her go, a quiet smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He knew Ethan's reputation would be fully restored now, and the truth would finally come to light. He gathered his evidence folders, satisfied that justice had been served. The door slammed behind Victoria with enough force to rattle the paintings on the wall. Through the boardroom's glass windows, they could see her marching down the hallway, head held high even in defeat, while Lucas's smile remained, knowing that honor had prevailed. Mrs. Chen approached Lucas as the other board members began to disperse. We should have seen through her schemes sooner, she said softly. Lucas nodded, but kept his response simple and dignified, his quiet smile speaking volumes about the victory of truth over malice. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the now empty chair where Victoria had sat for the last time. The late afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Ethan Cole wiped down the counter for the 100th time, his movements automatic as his mind wandered to the events of the past few weeks. The closed sign still hung on the door, but the interior sparkled from the thorough cleaning he'd given it while waiting for the health department's final clearance. Lucas Grant's polished shoes clicked against the floor as he entered through the unlocked back door, his usual confident stride carrying him straight to the counter where Ethan worked. Danny looked up from his homework at a corner booth, his eyes brightening at the sight of their now familiar visitor. Ethan, Lucas said, settling onto a chrome and vinyl stool. I've been thinking about everything that's happened, about you, about this place, about what it means to the community. Ethan set down his cleaning cloth. Mr. Grant, I can't thank you enough for clearing my name. The health department called this morning. We can reopen tomorrow. That's excellent news, Lucas replied, but his expression suggested he had more on his mind. But I'm here to propose something bigger. Something that could change not just your life, but many others too. Danny abandoned his homework and slid onto the stool next to Lucas, curiosity written across his young face. Ethan noticed his son still wore the watch Lucas had given him that first day. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. "I've been watching how you run this place," Lucas continued, gesturing around the diner. "The way you treat people, the dignity you show everyone who walks through that door. It's special, Ethan. Rare." Ethan felt his cheeks warm at the praise. "I just try to do right by people, like my wife always taught me." Lucas leaned forward, his eyes intense. "That's exactly why I want to propose a partnership. Not charity, not a handout, a true business partnership. I want to create a foundation cafe, with you at the helm." "A foundation cafe?" Ethan echoed, confusion clear in his voice. "Yes. A place that employs single parents and veterans, teaches them culinary skills, gives them a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity. Your recipes, your leadership, your heart, combined with my resources and business connections." Lucas pulled out a folder and spread several architectural renderings across the counter. "We'd start here, renovate and expand, create a training kitchen, proper dining space, even a small catering operation." Danny's eyes grew wide as he studied the drawings. "Dad, look, it's beautiful." Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he picked up one of the sketches. The familiar bones of his modest diner were there, but transformed into something grander, yet still welcoming. "This is overwhelming." "You'd have full creative control of the menu and kitchen?" Lucas continued. "I'd handle the business side, the foundation aspects. We'd be equal partners, Ethan. Your expertise is just as valuable as my capital." Ethan set the drawing down carefully, his throat tight. "I don't know, Mr. Grant. I'm just a cook. Running something like this, helping people rebuild their lives, that's a huge responsibility." "Dad," Danny said softly, "you already do that. Remember Mr. Jenkins? You gave him meals when he lost his job. And Mrs. Rodriguez, you taught her son how to cook when she was working double shifts." Lucas nodded approvingly at Danny's words. "Your son sees it clearly. You've been changing lives all along, Ethan. This would just give you the resources to do it on a larger scale." Ethan walked around the counter, needing to move as his mind raced. He stopped at the wall where his wife's first dollar earned at the diner still hung in its frame. His fingers traced the edge of the frame gently. "I've always tried to run this place the way Sarah would have wanted," he said quietly. "She believed in second chances, in treating everyone with respect, no matter what they were going through." "Then honor her memory by expanding that vision," Lucas urged. "Think of how many people you could help. How many families could find hope here, just like you've given hope to Danny through all these years." Ethan turned back to face them, his expression uncertain. "But after everything that happened with Victoria, with the scandal, would people trust me to run something like this?" "The community already showed their trust when they rallied around you," Lucas reminded him. "They know who you really are, Ethan. They've always known." Danny slid off his stool and walked to his father's side. His small hand found Ethan's larger one, squeezing it gently. "Mom would say yes," he whispered, looking up at his father with complete faith in his eyes. Ethan felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes as he met his son's gaze. In that moment, he saw Sarah's strength reflected there, her unwavering belief in doing what was right, in helping others find their way. He squeezed Danny's hand back and nodded slowly, finally believing in himself as much as his son believed in him. The early morning sun filtered through the newly cleaned windows of Ethan's diner, casting warm squares of light across drop cloths and paint cans. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon had been temporarily replaced by the sharp smell of fresh paint and sawdust. Workers moved about with purpose, their footsteps echoing off the bare walls. Ethan stood in the center of the controlled chaos, clipboard in hand, watching as volunteers transformed his modest diner into something entirely new. Lucas Grant, sleeves rolled up and a paint roller in hand, worked alongside everyone else, his expensive watch carefully stored away. "Dad! Dad!" Danny's excited voice cut through the construction noise. "Come look at what we're doing in the kids' corner." He grabbed Ethan's hand, practically dragging him toward the far section of the restaurant where several volunteers were assembling child-sized furniture. Danny pointed to a wall where he'd helped sketch out a mural design. "See? We're putting a rocket ship here, and over there will be bookshelves shaped like clouds." His eyes sparkled with pride. "And look at these." He held up several colorful drawings. "These are my ideas for the menu covers for kids." Ethan's heart swelled as he examined his son's artwork. Each drawing showed smiling faces around dinner tables, with careful lettering that read, "Everyone's welcome here," across the top. "These are perfect, buddy," he said, ruffling Danny's hair. Lucas walked over, wiping paint from his hands with a rag. "Your son's got quite an eye for design," he said, studying the drawings. "We should definitely use these." A team of carpenters worked on installing new booth seating, the rich burgundy upholstery adding warmth to the space. The counter, where Ethan had spent countless hours serving customers, was being extended and refinished, its surface gleaming under the new lighting fixtures. "The training kitchen's coming along nicely," Lucas mentioned, gesturing toward the back. "The new equipment arrives tomorrow." The expanded kitchen would serve dual purposes, preparing food for customers and teaching culinary skills to their future employees. Over the next few weeks, the transformation continued. The walls, once a faded yellow, now wore coats of warm earth tones. Local artists volunteered to paint murals celebrating the community's diversity. Veterans stopped by to help with the heavy lifting, sharing stories and laughs during water breaks. Danny spent every afternoon after school at the diner. Homework spread across a makeshift table, occasionally jumping up to offer suggestions or help where he could. He became the unofficial morale officer, bringing cookies to the workers and keeping everyone's spirits high with his infectious enthusiasm. One Tuesday afternoon, Ethan found himself in the new office, a space he never thought he'd have, reviewing applications with Lucas. "These stories," Ethan said softly, touching a stack of papers. "Single parents, veterans, they all just need a chance." "Like the chance you got," Lucas responded, his usual businesslike demeanor softening. "Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life." The kitchen equipment installation became a community event. Professional chefs who'd heard about the project volunteered their expertise, helping set up stations and offering suggestions for the training program. Ethan absorbed every bit of advice, determined to create something meaningful. Danny's Kids' Corner took shape beautifully. Volunteers painted his rocket ship design with careful attention to detail, adding twinkling stars and friendly aliens. The cloud-shaped bookshelves filled up with donated books, and tiny tables and chairs created perfect spots for children to feel at home while their parents worked or dined. The weeks flew by in a blur of activity. Every day brought new progress, new challenges, and new victories. The Foundation Cafe was becoming more than just a restaurant. It was becoming a symbol of hope and community spirit. One particularly busy afternoon, Ethan watched as Danny taught two younger children how to use the new educational tablets that had been donated for the Kids' Corner. His son had grown so much through this experience, showing leadership and compassion that made Ethan's chest tight with pride. The finishing touches came together like pieces of a perfect puzzle. The new sign arrived, Cole's Community Kitchen, with a smaller line underneath reading, "Where every meal feeds hope." Danny had helped choose the tagline, and Ethan couldn't think of anything more fitting. Local seamstresses crafted aprons for the staff, each one embroidered with the restaurant's new logo. The walk-in refrigerator hummed efficiently, waiting to be filled with fresh ingredients. New plates and silverware sat in neat stacks, ready for opening day. The training manuals, which Ethan had spent late nights preparing, lined the office shelves. Each one contained not just recipes and procedures, but the heart of what they were trying to achieve: dignity through work, community through service, and hope through opportunity. On the final day of renovation, as the last worker packed up their tools, Ethan stood in the center of the transformed space. Sunlight played through the new windows, highlighting the fresh paint and clean surfaces. The kitchen gleamed with possibility. Danny's Kids' Corner invited young visitors with its bright colors and comfortable spaces. Lucas appeared beside him, hands in his pockets, surveying their work. "What do you think?" Ethan's throat tightened as he took in every detail: the warm lighting, the comfortable booths, the state-of-the-art kitchen, the training area, and most importantly, the feeling of welcome that permeated every corner. His eyes settled on Danny, who was arranging books in the reading nook one last time, his face glowing with satisfaction. "This is more than I ever dreamed," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The autumn morning dawned bright and clear, perfect for new beginnings. Outside the transformed cafe, a red ribbon stretched across the freshly painted entrance, fluttering in the gentle breeze. The old diner's worn sign had been replaced with an elegant new one, reading, "Cole's Community Kitchen, where everyone belongs." Ethan stood before the mirror in the small office, adjusting his new chef's coat. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed down the crisp white fabric. The familiar weight of his wedding ring caught the light, and he paused, touching it gently. "Wish you could see this," he whispered. "Dad!" Danny burst through the door, practically bouncing with excitement. "There are so many people outside already." He wore a miniature version of Ethan's chef coat, specially made for the occasion. Ethan turned to his son, drinking in the sight of Danny's flushed cheeks and bright eyes. Gone was the hesitation that had shadowed his boy's face during their hardest times. "Ready to help me run this place, partner?" "You bet!" Danny grabbed his father's hand. "Come on, Lucas is looking for you." They emerged into the main dining room, now unrecognizable from its humble diner days. Warm wood tables gleamed under pendant lights, and the walls displayed local artwork. The open kitchen sparkled with new equipment, while comfortable booths lined the windows. But what caught Ethan's eye was the wall of photographs near the entrance, pictures of veterans and single parents who would work here, their stories written beneath each image. Lucas stood by the front door in a simple suit, chatting with reporters and city officials. When he spotted Ethan, he broke into a genuine smile. "There's our chef, ready to make history?" The crowd outside had grown larger, filling the sidewalk. Ethan recognized familiar faces from the neighborhood, mixed with curious onlookers. Veterans stood tall in their service caps, and single parents held their children's hands, all waiting for the doors to open. Mayor Thompson stepped forward with a large pair of scissors. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "today we celebrate more than just a new business. We celebrate community, second chances, and the power of believing in people." She turned to Ethan. "Would you and Danny like to do the honors?" Danny's eyes widened. "Really? Can we, Dad?" Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Together, they grasped the scissors, their hands overlapping. With a satisfying snick, the ribbon fell away. Applause erupted as the doors swung open. People streamed in, filling the space with chatter and laughter. The new staff, a mix of veterans and single parents who had trained for weeks, moved confidently to their positions. Sarah, a former Army sergeant, managed the host stand with military precision. Mike, a single dad of 3, worked the coffee station with the expertise he'd developed during training. Ethan made his way to the kitchen, where he found his team ready and waiting. These weren't just employees, they were partners in this venture, each with an ownership stake, thanks to Lucas's innovative business model. "Remember," he told them, "every dish we send out tells our story. Let's make it a good one." The kitchen came alive with movement and purpose. The sizzle of pans, the chopping of vegetables, and the calls of "order up" created a symphony Ethan had missed during the diner's closure. But this was different, better. Each person here knew they were building something larger than themselves. Danny darted between tables, delivering water and menus with professional pride. He'd memorized the entire menu and could explain every dish with enthusiasm. Customers smiled at his earnest descriptions and careful attention to detail. "Just like his father," Ethan overheard one regular say. "Got that same way of making you feel at home." The morning rush peaked, then settled into a steady rhythm. Ethan stepped out of the kitchen to check on his guests, moving from table to table. He stopped to chat with Mr. Endevrel Peterson, a World War II veteran who had been one of his most loyal diner customers. "This is something special you've built here, son," Mr. Peterson said, gesturing around the room. "Gives people more than just a meal, gives them dignity." Ethan squeezed the old soldier's shoulder, too moved to speak. Near the window, a young single mother wiped tears from her eyes after finishing her meal. Danny noticed first and rushed over. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Didn't you like the food?" She smiled, catching Ethan's eye as he approached. "The food was wonderful. It's just, I used to be a waitress before my husband left. Nobody would hire me with my little one at home. But now," she gestured to the kitchen, where another single mom was training as a line cook, "now I see there's hope." Ethan knelt beside her table. "Come talk to us after lunch service. We're still hiring." The woman's eyes lit up with the same hope Ethan had felt when Lucas first proposed this venture. As the lunch rush wound down, Ethan watched Danny expertly clear tables and chat with customers. His son moved with a new confidence, head held high. Gone was the boy who had asked why they couldn't have nice things. In his place stood a young man who understood that the finest things in life weren't things at all. Danny caught his father watching and beamed, his smile brighter than any fancy watch could ever be. He carried a fresh pot of coffee to a table of veterans, listening intently as they shared stories of their service days. The old soldiers treated him with grandfatherly affection, and Danny soaked up their wisdom like a sponge. Ethan leaned against the counter, taking in the scene before him. The cafe hummed with life and purpose. Through the windows, sunshine painted golden patterns on the floor. The words, "Where everyone belongs," cast gentle shadows on the wall, a promise made real. Lucas appeared at his side, coffee cup in hand. "Quite a change from that first day in the diner, isn't it?" Ethan nodded, watching as Danny carefully refilled water glasses, his face glowing with pride and purpose. The joy in his son's eyes told the whole story. They had found their place, their purpose, their way to make the world a little better. In that moment, Ethan knew they had built more than just a cafe. They had built a home for second chances, a place where dignity and hope served themselves up daily alongside the coffee and pie. And in his son's shining eyes, he saw the future they had dreamed of finally taking shape. Ethan pulled up to Danny's school in their old pickup truck, its familiar rattle now a comfort rather than an embarrassment. The morning sun caught the fresh paint on the cafe's logo on the truck door, a small upgrade Lucas had insisted on. As he watched through the windshield, something was different about Danny today. His son walked with his shoulders back, head held high as he crossed the schoolyard. The watch Lucas had given him still gleamed on his wrist, but it wasn't the centerpiece of his confidence anymore. Other kids waved and called out to him, not with the previous mixture of pity and teasing, but with genuine friendship. "Hey, Danny!" A boy rushed up, backpack bouncing. "Can I come to the cafe after school? My mom says your dad makes the best meatloaf in town." Danny's face lit up. "Sure. Thursday is comfort food night. We're serving my mom's special recipe." Ethan's heart squeezed at the casual way Danny mentioned his mother now. The pain was still there, but it had softened into something sweeter, like the memory of her recipes that now fed so many. Mrs. Thompson, Danny's teacher, noticed Ethan in the truck and walked over, her silver hair catching the morning light. She leaned down to his window with a warm smile. "Mr. Cole, I had to tell you, Danny's whole demeanor has changed these past few weeks. He's more engaged in class, helping other students, even volunteered to give a presentation about the cafe's veteran training program." Ethan felt his cheeks warm. "That means a lot, Mrs. Thompson. It's been quite a journey. The whole town's talking about what you're doing," she continued. "My husband, he's a Vietnam vet. He started working in your kitchen last week. He hasn't smiled this much in years." A group of parents gathered near the school entrance waved at Ethan. He recognized them from the cafe, single mothers who'd found work there, fathers who brought their kids for the affordable family meals. The previous invisible walls of social status had crumbled, replaced by something stronger, community. That afternoon, Ethan watched Danny doing homework at his usual spot at the counter, but now he was helping another student understand fractions using measuring cups from the kitchen. The cafe hummed with activity. Veterans learning food prep skills, parents training on the register, elderly volunteers teaching young ones how to fold napkins just right. Lucas dropped by, as he often did, without his usual expensive suit. He'd taken to wearing jeans and a simple shirt when he visited, sitting at the counter like any other customer. "The foundation board is impressed," Lucas said, sipping coffee. "They want to expand the model to other towns." Ethan wiped down the counter, a habit he couldn't break. It's not about impressing anyone anymore. It's about making sure everyone who walks through that door feels like they belong. That's exactly why it works, Lucas replied, watching Danny help a veteran carry plates to a table. You've built something money can't buy. As evening approached, Ethan began his favorite part of the day, teaching a cooking class to a mixed group of veterans and single parents. Danny assisted, proudly demonstrating how to measure ingredients. The pride in his son's eyes meant more than any fancy watch or expensive sneakers ever could. At home that night, their small apartment felt different too. The walls that had once seemed to close in with worry now held photos of cafe celebrations, Danny's artwork, and a framed article about their community dinners. Even the scratched kitchen table where they'd spent so many quiet meals now hosted regular gaming nights with their new extended family of cafe workers and volunteers. Ethan followed their nighttime routine, but noticed Danny lingering over his mother's photo on the nightstand. His son touched the frame gently, then looked up with eyes that seemed older, wiser. "Dad," Danny said as Ethan tucked the blanket around him. "Remember when I used to ask why we couldn't have nice things?" Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, the memory of those harder days still fresh. "I do, buddy." Danny's fingers played with the edge of his blanket. "I was thinking today, when Tommy showed off his new video game, I didn't feel bad about not having one. I just invited him to come help at the cafe instead." Ethan's throat tightened as Danny continued. "The veterans tell the best stories, and Mrs. Martinez is teaching me Spanish while she cooks, and Mr. Wilson says I'm the best junior chef he's ever seen." Danny's voice grew softer, thoughtful. "I don't care about things anymore. We have something better." Ethan had to take a deep breath to steady his voice. His son's simple wisdom echoed everything they'd learned through their struggles and triumph. In that moment, watching Danny's peaceful face in the soft lamplight, Ethan realized they'd gained something far more valuable than material success. They'd found their place in the world, their way to make a difference. The late afternoon sun streamed through the cafe's windows, casting warm shadows across the polished wooden tables. Lucas Grant stood quietly in the doorway, his usual crisp suit replaced by casual slacks and a light sweater. He watched as Ethan moved through the space with an easy grace that hadn't been there before. At the counter, Ethan was showing a new employee, a veteran with a prosthetic leg, how to properly steam milk for lattes. His patience was evident in his gentle instructions and encouraging smile. "That's it, Mike. Listen for that whisper sound. When you hear it, you know you're getting it right." The veteran's face lit up as he achieved the perfect foam, and Ethan's proud nod meant more than any formal certification could. Lucas felt something twist in his chest, a recognition of what true wealth looked like. Near the window, Danny was helping an elderly woman with her tea, carefully carrying the cup to her table. The boy who had once asked why they couldn't have nice things now moved with the same quiet dignity as his father. Lucas found a seat in the corner, content to observe. He watched as Ethan greeted each customer by name, remembered their usual orders, and asked about their families. A young single mother arrived for her shift, and Ethan immediately noticed her tired eyes. "Rough night with the baby?" he asked kindly. When she nodded, he adjusted her schedule on the spot, giving her an easier section for the day. The billionaire's hands wrapped around his coffee cup, warming them as he pondered how different this was from his usual corporate boardrooms. There, power was measured in stock prices and hostile takeovers. Here, it flowed in small acts of kindness and understanding. A group of businessmen in expensive suits entered, talking loudly on their phones. Lucas recognized their type. He used to be just like them, brushing past ordinary people without a second glance. But Ethan treated them no differently than he did the construction worker at the counter or the elderly woman with her tea. One of the businessmen complained about his coffee being too hot. Lucas tensed, expecting confrontation, but Ethan simply smiled and made him a fresh cup. "Sometimes it takes a few tries to get things just right," he said, his voice carrying no judgment. The businessman's irritated expression softened. After an hour of watching, Lucas couldn't help but notice how the cafe had become more than just a restaurant. It was a place where barriers broke down, where people from all walks of life sat together, shared stories, and found common ground. And at the center of it all was Ethan, a man who had every reason to be bitter but chose grace instead. Finally, Lucas stood and approached the counter. Ethan looked up, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "Lucas, I didn't see you come in. Let me get you a fresh cup." "The coffee's not why I'm here," Lucas said quietly. He gestured to 2 empty seats by the window. "Got a minute?" They sat down, and for a moment, both men watched the steady flow of life through the cafe. A veteran was teaching a young single mother how to operate the register. Danny was showing a group of kids his age how to properly stack the clean dishes. The elderly woman was sharing cookies with the businessman who had complained earlier. "You know," Lucas began, his voice unusually soft, "I've built skyscrapers, launched companies, and closed billion-dollar deals. But watching this," he gestured to the room, "this is what real success looks like." Ethan's eyes crinkled with understanding. "It's not what I expected either. When you first offered to help, I thought it was about the money, about giving people jobs. But it's become something else. It's become a community," Lucas finished. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I need to tell you something, Ethan. When I first met you and Danny in that diner, I thought I was the one doing you a favor. I was wrong." Ethan listened quietly as Lucas continued. "I've spent my life building walls, expensive ones, private clubs, exclusive resorts, invitation, only events, all to keep the world at a safe distance. But watching you these past months, you lost everything, and instead of building walls, you built bridges." "We all need bridges sometimes," Ethan said simply. "My wife taught me that. When she died, neighbors brought casseroles. When the diner was struggling, people left extra-large tips. When Victoria tried to destroy us, the community showed up. I'm just passing it on." Lucas nodded, looking down at his hands. "I've changed how I run my other businesses. Started listening more to the maintenance staff, the receptionists, the cleaning crews. Started seeing people instead of positions." He met Ethan's eyes. "You taught me that." The late afternoon light painted the cafe in soft gold. Through the window they could see Danny helping an elderly man to his car, carrying his takeout bag. The boy's face shone with the simple joy of being useful. "Your son asked why he couldn't have nice things," Lucas said. "But you've given him the nicest thing of all. You've shown him how to live with purpose." Ethan's eyes grew misty. "We all have purpose. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us." Lucas stood, extending his hand. "Thank you, Ethan. Not for the cafe or the partnership, but for showing me a better way to live." Ethan rose and gripped Lucas's hand firmly. The handshake was more than a business gesture. It was a moment of deep mutual respect between 2 men who had learned from each other. The evening sun painted the cafe's weathered brick walls in warm golden hues as Ethan and Danny sat on the wooden bench outside. The closed sign swung gently in the breeze behind them. 2 ice cream cones, vanilla for Ethan, chocolate chip for Danny, dripped slowly in the late summer warmth. Ethan watched his son lick around the edge of his cone, catching a falling drop before it reached his fingers. Danny's other hand absently touched the watch on his wrist, the same watch that had started their journey months ago. The silver face caught the dying sunlight, sending little sparkles dancing across Danny's cheeks. "Remember when Mr. Grant gave you that watch?" Ethan asked softly. Danny nodded, studying the timepiece with a thoughtful expression that made him seem older than his 10 years. "It feels like forever ago, doesn't it, Dad?" "Sure does, buddy." Ethan took another bite of his ice cream, savoring the sweetness. The street was quiet now, most shops closed for the day. A few cars passed by, their drivers waving, familiar faces who'd become regulars at the Foundation Cafe. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Danny asked, his legs swinging beneath the bench. "Remember when I used to ask for new stuff all the time?" Ethan's heart tightened a little, remembering those difficult days when he couldn't give Danny the things other kids had. "I do remember. I was watching Tommy Miller showing off his new phone at school today," Danny continued, his voice steady and sure. "And you know what, Dad? I didn't feel bad about not having one. Not even a little bit." A warm breeze rustled through the trees lining the street, carrying the lingering scents of the day's baking: cinnamon, fresh bread, and coffee. Ethan waited, letting his son find his words. "I saw Miss Sarah teaching that new kid, Joey, how to work the register today," Danny said, referring to one of the single moms Ethan had hired. "She looked so happy, Dad. Like really happy, and I thought, we did that. We helped make that happen." Ethan smiled, remembering how Sarah had arrived 3 weeks ago, nervous and unsure. Now she walked with confidence, her head held high. "We sure did, buddy. Well, mostly Mr. Grant did." "No, Dad." Danny shook his head firmly. "Mr. Grant gave us a chance, but you're the one who made it work. You're the one who teaches everyone and makes them feel good about themselves." A mother and daughter walked past, waving cheerfully. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Cole," the little girl called out. "Mom says we're coming for breakfast." After they passed, Danny finished the last bite of his cone and wiped his hands on a napkin. His fingers traced the watch's smooth surface again. "You know what else, Dad? Remember when Victoria said mean things about us not belonging with fancy people?" Ethan nodded, the memory still stinging slightly. "Well, she was right, but not the way she meant it." Danny's face lit up with that pure, honest smile that always reminded Ethan of his late wife. "We don't belong with fancy stuff and stuck-up people. We belong here, helping others feel better about themselves." The street lamps flickered on, one by one, creating pools of soft light along the sidewalk. A few stars peeked out in the darkening sky above them. Ethan wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, pulling him close. "Sometimes I think about Mom," Danny said quietly. "I think she'd be really proud of us. Not because we got successful or anything, but because we're doing good things for other people." Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes growing misty. "I think about her too, buddy. Every day. She used to say that the best things in life aren't things at all," Danny continued, his voice soft but clear in the evening quiet. "I didn't really get it back then, but I do now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sky darken and more stars appear. A gentle peace settled over them, different from the desperate quiet of their old life. This was the peace of contentment, of knowing exactly where you belong. Danny looked up at his father, his eyes shining in the starlight. "Dad, we do have nice things. We have each other." His voice carried all the wisdom of his young heart. Ethan pulled him closer, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "That's the nicest thing of all. What would you do if you were in their place?" Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Cole, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.